passed away, and the apartment was vacant, and I went into the bathroom and I cut off my pious, and I pretty much shaved my head, and found some old clothes of my grandfather's that weren't very Hasidish. I mean, they were kind of old grandfather clothes that are probably back in style now. But so basically shaved my head, put on this old rain hat and a trench coat from the 70s, and got onto the subway and quote unquote ran away. It lasted one night when I realized I had no plan, I had no means of existing in the outside world and surviving. And I quickly came back. But that's definitely one of the formative moments. And that's something that's kind of reflected in the scene where Yankee cuts off his pious. And then fast forward almost 20 years, the moment when I realized I can no longer do this anymore, and told my then wife, and shortly thereafter my parents, that I was leaving, and kind of came out to them as an atheist. That was obviously a very difficult conversation to have. Those were the two dramatic moments that bookended 20 years of just floundering and flailing and being lost and looking for answers and trying to make it work.
And Ellie, if I could just follow up, what was it for you that like you were looking for that didn't sit right?
I think I remember having this one conversation with my mother and my older brother in the kitchen when I was like 16, 17, something like that. So this would have been after the first time I ran away. And I think it was the first time I hit upon what really bothered me. And that was, if, you know, even if God exists, by what right can he expect us to you know, follow him and follow all the mitzvahs and do what we're supposed to do if we don't actually believe in him? I thought that was just kind of an intellectual moral conundrum that I couldn't get away from. And that is, if deep in our hearts we really don't believe in it, then by what right can we be forced to do it? You know, even if it's all true, but if we sincerely don't believe in it, then there's nothing to be done about that. And so there's absolutely no moral grounds, no just grounds to be punished for not doing something you don't believe in. And I think that was for me the hardest question that I could never find an answer for. But I mean, kind of flowing from that, and on top of that, there was everything else. There was I think the other thing that really always bothered me was the criminalization of our bodies. And for me, the biggest struggle growing up was trying to be a good Hasidic bucher and to refrain from masturbating. I mean, for a pubescent boy, that is the most difficult thing. And when you package that with this notion that your body is evil and it is the single most evil act you can commit, and by doing that you bring all kinds of bad forces into this world, and the kind of responsibility that rests squarely on your shoulders as a pubescent boy, that to me is the most evil thing anybody can do to a healthy growing human being. And I can only imagine what that's like for a woman, but for a boy, I mean, that was just, you know, I spent years and years literally agonizing over that. And I know others go through this as well. And you feel so alone because there's nobody you can talk to about that, because you think you're the only person in the world who's going through that. And of course, it's something you just don't talk about. So for me, that was the single most difficult part of growing up. And I I knew in my heart of hearts that any person or being who can create a system that does that to a child is cruel.
Some intense things for us to sit with as we open up this conversation.
Sorry to get so quickly. But.
I have no doubt that you would, Ellie. Melissa, I wanna ask you the same question. You know, was it a dramatic moment for you? Was it a gradual buildup, and or was it a little bit of both? And what was it in particular?
Yeah.
What was the it?
Yeah. So I want to say hi and thank you for having me, and I'm happy to be here. And hi, everybody. Thank you for coming and joining us. And I've been a member of Footsteps for like, say 12 years. So I'm really happy you get to hear a bit about us and the work that Footsteps does. So for me, it's a bit of both, a lot of both. So the moments, so for me, Ellie brought up about struggling and not sure what it feels like as a woman, right? So he described his experience as a man, and they're taught that that's the worst thing they can do. For me, I was not in touch with my body, I think, at all. So that wasn't a struggle. The struggle was feeling that there was very specific, the gender roles. That was the thing that I constantly questioned. So I didn't understand why men would do certain things and women would do other things. I didn't understand why certain things were expected from us that weren't expected from men. There was policing of our bodies in the sense of modesty rules. And that was a lot of it butted heads with that of like, why am I responsible for a man? Not like, you know, like if I'm too provocative, then I would make a man sin, right? And it's a lot of pressure. But for me, I was constantly questioning. And as a woman, that's not expected or accepted. And so I was questioning my role as a woman. I was questioning what Hasidus, like what Satmar is. I was questioning what Judaism is and why, you know, I wanted to learn about other things as well. And so for me, the constant questioning was something that I was told was bad. So I grew up with there was a lot of moments of me questioning and getting into trouble in school for questioning. So and they would just say, oh, you're confused. Some people would try to be nice, but then they also told my friends not to be friends with me because I'm confused. So it ended up being a really rough time. And it was mostly just because my mind I was thinking about things, and they were afraid that if I share it out loud, then it would make other people think about it. So for me, that was a big part of my struggle. And then I went to seminary in England and I studied more, and I got a tutor so I can learn it, because in Satmar you don't learn inside the books. But I really immersed myself in it. And I had this, we had a night seder where we would study Torah. We had a chavrusa, we'd study Torah with a partner, and there would be rabbis on the four corners, and you can ask questions. And I would always ask questions. So I would always be studying with a rabbi every night. And then after about a month or so, this rabbi said, it's a shame you weren't born male. So I felt like that wrapped up my whole life struggle. It's a shame I wasn't born male. And I didn't want to be male. I was really comfortable and happy being a woman, and I still am. It was though that the expression of what that meant, like as a female, it's not important to think this way. And I felt judged for just questioning. So for me, it was a lot of that. And then I tried to really immerse myself. I tried to be really religious in the way that I understood it. So I tried to make it work. And it was a lot of trying to fit myself into a box, to fold myself into these little, to try so hard. So after seminary, I prayed 3 times a day, but with my own words. I made it make sense in my own head. I tried really different things. And I did the whole thing. I also had an arranged marriage and tried to make it my own. And then after about 4 years of that, I was like, I don't see that I can have a family here. This doesn't feel right. And the questions weren't answered. And so I went to Texas, and I figured anybody in Texas that's religious means it in a very different way than in New York, because in New York, it's easy to be religious. And it's also, you have so much peer pressure. And I had a friend that I had met in seminary, and she lived in Texas. And that was where I got my first pair of pants. I got Armani jeans, and now I was really fancy in an outlet store. And I wore pants for the first time, and I met people that weren't religious, she does like a kira, so they came to her Shabbos meal, and I met this woman there that she was converting to Judaism. And so her and I got into these conversations, and a lot of it, first it was like, oh, it's about intellectually, this makes sense to her. And then ultimately she shared how this is just a feeling, that she feels this is right. And it gave me permission. It allowed me to give myself permission that I didn't have to have all the answers. And I know that this doesn't feel as right. It can be beautiful Shabbos, but it didn't feel right for me. Because till then, I was speaking to rabbis of different denominations. I spoke to a priest. I was trying so hard to make sense of it all. And when she shared with me her ultimate feeling that this, I was just like, okay. And that was my big moment. And from then on, there was little moments of letting go of the guilt, letting go of the fears. There were very, very memorable moments of the little letting go, but the big one was just that decision.
Thanks. So Melissa, you talking about this raises one of these very common questions that comes up that I think is a important one to address, which is, often I'm asked, and I know that a lot of folks who are part of this community of leavers, if you will, are asked a question like, why is it that people need to throw out the baby with the bathwater? Why does it need to be all or nothing? And I'm curious what, Melissa, you just spoke to it a little bit. So I'm curious if you might want to expound upon that, what your reaction is to questions like that and how it is that you've, found ways to reclaim your own identity in a way that feels authentic to yourself.
Yeah, right. That's a hard thing, because as I was trying so hard to not throw out the baby with bathwater, I tried so hard. It's years of trying to fit yourself into a box, being like, okay, this doesn't make sense, but I'm going to try to make it work. Trying to make sense of it in your own unique way. That was years of doing that. So ultimately, it felt for me that I had to fully leave to really then be able to see it clearer, and to then decide what feels good, what feels right, what I can choose. And I found this beautiful thing of you get to pick and choose, which is something my family would be like, you can't pick and choose what you want to do, right? They would be because I was very religious in some ways and not in other ways, and they would use it as a negative thing, you can't just pick and choose. And I'm like, yeah, I can. And now I get to, and that's really awesome but I needed a lot of distance. I needed distance so they don't have a say. I needed distance so I can think for myself. And I can also heal and process and understand that some of it is not the religion, or some of it is not the people, some of it is the teaching, some of it is the specific people. To really be able to, take a step back and then take my time to figure out it's a journey, I feel for everybody in such a different way, but it's important to take the time.
So everything that Melissa said, but also I think that it's incredibly disingenuous, and you get this question a lot specifically from Hasidic people, from ultra-Orthodox people, that are like, okay, but why did you have to go to take such extreme steps? Why couldn't you find a happy home in the modern Orthodox community? And the reason why it's so disingenuous is, growing up Hasidic, you're literally taught that it is the only true form of Judaism, and that no other form of Judaism is correct. And it's all or nothing, and it's black and white. And if you change even a single custom, you're going down a slippery slope to, converting to Christianity. So for them to argue after you've left, well, you didn't have to leave at all, is incredibly disingenuous. But also, imagine, if you will, having an abusive relationship with a significant other. When you finally get the courage to leave that relationship, you do not stay friends with that other person. You do not become casual acquaintances with that other person. You completely cut that out of your life. And most people who leave have had a very traumatic relationship with Judaism. So it's very difficult to, quote unquote, stay friends. But like Melissa said, most of us, or many of us rather, reach a point later on, eventually, where we start becoming comfortable with the concept of maybe there's a part of it I still want to have a relationship with. But that takes years of healing to get there. And many of us never do.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I think one of the things that I see a lot at Footsteps is I need to say, you know, I've been in my role as executive director of Footsteps for 10 years. I had my own journey towards, you know, what authentic Lani looks like in the world in relationship to my own, you know, religious journey. And I think one of the things that I've found is sometimes really hard for people is that when they've found joy in religion, they are sometimes offended that there are people who've been traumatized by it. But that one of the most important things is not to take it personally, that like there are a lot of people who've been traumatized, who've had traumatic experiences with religion, and that we need to respect that and respect the choices they then make, and that it's really up to our members to make those choices. And I think, and for all of those who've left to make those choices on their own, and for all of us to sort of really withhold judgment on where folks land. So I'd say like there was a internal learning curve for me. And I've found that as people get to know folks who've left, they also have this learning curve. So thanks for sharing, the two of you. I'm curious if we could pivot back to Unorthodox for a moment and talk about maybe one thing that each of you wants. You know, I believe we have upwards of 500 people now on this call. You know, the folks on this call to know of some of the untold stories that might not have come out through the series that they watched. Does Melissa want to start on this one, and then we'll go back to Ellie?
Yeah, I think that, right, it's one person's story. And I think when people don't know a lot of people from that community, they don't get a sense of you know, they see that story and think that's how all Hasidim are. So the thing that I want to talk to is there definitely was a lot of pain for me, but there was also a lot of joy growing up in a large family. Like you can imagine having a large family with a bunch of kids. There's so much noise and life, and it's not just the serious thing that you see, which is like meek. For me, it's also specifically sometimes, and people that live in New York often think of women as meek, and it's Hasidic women. And I think that there's so much passion that we don't get to see as much. And so there's noise, and there's joy, and there's love, and there's fighting, and there's music, and there's song, and there's dance, there's life. And I think that's the part that it exists. So it does exist in the community, and there's a lot of passion. Some of the passion is very specifically most of it is specifically connected to Hasidic, you know, Judaism. But there's passion and life and color, you know. And I think with Unorthodox specifically, they did, part of that story was also to the way that they framed it and cinematically, and I thought it was beautiful. But they're showing the light and the light and the dark. Like in Williamsburg was framed bleak, and then Berlin was fantastically amazing. You know, everything was okay. And I just think that there's a lot of nuance in the Hasidic community, which is, I think, important in any community, in humanity. And I think that's the part that I would say.
Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah.
What about for you, Ellie? What's your untold story? And before you do that, I am looking at some of the questions, and there's a lot of questions. People want to know what the sign behind you says. So I think you need to tell them that first.
I wrote that at the beginning, and actually that sign was done by my partner. It says auf Zolachis, which is a famous Yiddish expression. It literally translates as out of spite, but it's kind of Yiddish for fuck you, and it's ironic, and it's really beautiful. And this was not I realized only after I framed this shot that was displayed so prominently. It wasn't necessarily a conscious choice, but maybe it was subconscious. I just forgot the question. The Untold Story. Yes, I agree very much with Melissa, and this was the story of one single person, an experience of one single person. And I think the show goes to pains to demonstrate how different and unique this person's circumstances are. We shouldn't think that everybody has such a dysfunctional family and everybody has such an unhappy childhood. I had a very happy childhood, despite all my problems and despite my being different. I had a loving family, I had loving parents, I still have loving parents. And I consider myself very lucky. I have an incredible relationship with them. I mean, it's complicated, it's challenging because we have nothing in common anymore. And it's hard sometimes finding a safe topic of discussion other than the weather. You know, politics are out of the question. But we still talk a lot. I go for Shabbos. I wear a couple, I wear a yarmulke when I go. And, but other than that, they don't really expect anything of me. They more or less accept who I am and love me anyway. And I think it's important that we know that those examples exist as well, and that it's possible to have a healthy, loving relationship with your Hasidic family even after you leave. And I know I'm not the only one who does that. But unfortunately,
Is it my internet that's frozen or is it Ellie's?
I think it's Ellie's.
Okay. Oh, technology. Oh, we lost him. Okay, Melissa, it's you and
yes.
I for, oh, you're there. Hi.
At what point did you meet me? Because I've been going on for 10 minutes.
You were waxing on the beauty of having and maintaining a relationship with your family, and how many people do, and I see that a lot as well at Footsteps. I think that there's an assumption that it's an either or.
Exactly, and it is possible, and it is doable, and obviously it takes work. It takes work on both sides. But it has happened, it can happen, and I think we need to celebrate those stories as well. But unfortunately, I think more often than not, people do get cut off one way or another from their families.
Yeah, I'll just say that over the years at Footsteps, this was like one of the, I think one of the top assumptions that people have is that like folks really don't have a relationship with their families, and I've seen the opposite to be true, and that people find a way to, because there's a real desire to have that connection with family. I think one of the hardest things for people is that it's hard to be truly like one's full self with their families, and that struggle is real many years out. But that also, you know, one of the common conversations that happens around groups at Footsteps when we're able to meet in person, and still happens online in groups now during COVID, is that like this is actually a pretty common and universal piece of work in the world, to live authentically and then be supported by your family who sees you in a particular way, is something that a lot of people struggle with in the world. So I want to pivot. I think I'll go deep on one more question that will take about probably maybe a good 10 minutes on, because it's a meaty topic, and then we'll go to some of the Q&A. And this is one about the magical nature of Esty happening on a group of friends in Berlin in a cafe, and the magical nature of how she, you know, seemingly resolved her emotional issues around self-confidence and intimate relations pretty easily. And I'm curious if the two of you could add some color to the process of building community and learning, you know, social norms along the way, and yeah, how you both figured it out. And so let's go we'll start with Ellie and then go to Melissa.
Okay, so obviously, out of the demands of a limited series, that process was very much accelerated. Most people do not find a new community in 4 days. Most people do not have an easy time adjusting. Although the show does present some issues she has, and kind of being a fish out of water, and the steep learning curve people have when they leave. But due to the time constraints and the format, they had to tie it up very neatly, very quickly. But for the majority of us, it's a lifelong struggle, fitting in, finding new community. For me, that meant Footsteps. That meant the Off the Dark group on Facebook. That meant Freedom. That meant all the various kind of social subgroups of the OTD community, of the Fry community. So it's a process, and it takes a long time. But I do want to say that I spent 6 months filming in Berlin, and there's something about that city that is positively magical. And I think part of it is also the fact that I was far away from the source of all my trauma for the first time, and far away from people that are even familiar with Hasidic Jews. And I felt free for the first time, and I felt very liberated. But I know that some people manage to hit the ground running, but of course, more often than not, that's not the case. And it can take years and years and years, if not a lifetime, to actually adjust. And some of us never do, and that's fine, as long as we keep trying.
Melissa, what about you? What was the process of sort of rebuilding, reclaiming community, and figuring out the social norms out there?
Yeah. So for me, it was a lot of pretending, which might be why I'm an actor, Maybe it was something I got comfortable with. I don't know, but it was a lot of pretending. I was constantly pretending that I was okay. I would go into situations and I felt embarrassed to not know. So I acted, like a child wants to be an adult or is acting like too adult-like. I felt like I was acting all of that, but internally, I was scared. I was unaware. I didn't understand social cues, so I got into situations that weren't safe at times. Luckily, I was an adult and I learned fast. But it was not an easy thing to adjust. And it's still it took a long time to understand social norms, references. And for me, there was a lot of a fear of community, because community was something that for me felt like it was more, it's entrapping a word? Maybe not, yeah. So it felt like so it wasn't a feeling of freedom, and I fought so hard to be free. So I was so afraid to join any other group, to feel like, oh, now I'm gonna have to do what they asked me to do eventually. Because oftentimes it's like, oh, we love you, everything is great. And then you learn the ins and outs and you're like, I don't, And I remember my first roommate was Jewish, but modern Orthodox or Moroccan. And I had first left and I was feeling like I wanted to explore life. And she was like, only be with someone that's Jewish and only eat kosher food. I'm like, stop giving me rules. It felt like there was just too many. And because she wanted me to she felt her life was great, and I'm sure it is. But for me, it felt like anything that I got too close, I was afraid of them having some sort of say in my life. So it took a long time to understand and find a way that I can have community without feeling like I have to change who I am. And Footsteps was more of my, like an extended family. So Footsteps felt like a place that I would go out in this world and pretend that I was fine and act like I was cool. I knew what was happening. And then I would come to Footsteps and be like, I don't know what I'm doing. What am I doing? And also be able to breathe, because I felt like I was on. And so I was able to breathe, and also in those support groups, be able to share and have other people talk. You know, like you had mentioned earlier about with family, we would talk in Footsteps groups about topics that were affecting us as people that had left the community and living in the outside world. It's like, so we would discuss these topics, and I'd be able to share with other people how that feels, how lonely it feels, how misunderstood I feel, how much of like a kid I feel, because I'm out in the world and I should know, you know, I was in my 20s, I should know what this is, what life is, and I don't. And so there's a lot of like being able to commiserate and also learn. So Footsteps was a lot of that. And then I found new roommates through that. So it was like figuring out, it's like a push and pull with community and figuring out how to do that. But it was many, many years for me, like many, many years. And I honestly do find that many of my friends are either people who have left the community or people that are immigrants. So I have a lot of friends who are not born in this country. And so I feel like I'm a stranger in my country, and I feel like I connect with other people who also feel like that, who also had that experience of leaving something behind that feels like home. So yeah, it was a long process for me.
Thanks for sharing. So I'm going to turn to some of these questions and give folks a chance. There are questions that have come in already, so I'm going to try to get through a bunch of these, but feel free to start to also send more. So there's a question about how many people in the community would love to leave but are afraid to. And so this is like your best guess. If either of you have a best guess, and I could also give my best estimates of what I've heard in my time at Footsteps. So do either of you have a best guess at that, or just like, you know, thinking to your group of friends from growing up, you know, what your guesstimate is there?
I think for me, numbers are very hard, so I'm going to leave that to you. I know that I get calls and messages from people in the community, and they talk to me about their struggles. So I get people who are like, I'm not sure if I'm confused, or like maybe I want to be a guy, because that's their understanding of like, if you're not Hasidic, you're going to be a guy. But I definitely get, and I have these calls and messages. I had one today of people wanting to leave. And these are people that have access to the computer, have access to internet, to be able to find a way to talk to me. So I like to think, I have 6 sisters and 2 brothers, and I like to think that most of them are happy. Like that gives me peace, and it makes me feel like I want people that live there to be happy. And so I'd like to think the majority is happy, but there's so many people in the community, and there's a large percentage. There's a large group of people that if it wasn't that hard, if they weren't going to lose everything, and that's some of the stuff that I talk through with these people that call, and they're even afraid. Like I'll send them to Footsteps very often, all the time. That's like my first thing to send to Footsteps. Some of them are really even afraid of that, if they're going to be found out, and all that loss. If there's numbers, yeah, that's just what I have to say about
that. Ellie, do you have anything you want to add on that question?
Yeah, numbers wise, I mean, I would say that somewhere between 10 and 20% of people actually leave. And I would think another 10 or 20% would leave if they had the resources, if they had the wherewithal, if they weren't afraid of suffering the consequences. So that would be my best guess. Obviously, there's no hard data out there. And I guess I echo what Melissa said. I have a relatively small family, only 4 siblings, but I have, I think, close to 40 nieces and nephews. They're all wonderful, well-adjusted Hasidic kids. They're all beautiful and wonderful and talented. It's actually miraculous, I think, nothing short of miraculous. But out of all of them, one of them messaged me that he saw the show. He really liked it. he was amazed how it captured, you know, all the nuances and this and that. And he said, don't get me wrong, I don't like it because I agree with Esty and I want to leave. I just thought it was, I just thought it was very well done, but I'm happy. But you know, for every person like that out there, there are so many that would if they could. This show has brought. I know everybody involved with the show has been getting nonstop messages. We've been getting inundated with messages from people on the inside, in the communities in Borough Park and Williamsburg and Muncie and Monroe and so on, writing to us their own personal story, and they all say the same thing: I am Esty. And I wish I could leave, but I can't, and it's heartbreaking.
I'm just sitting with that a little bit. Thank you for sharing some of that, and thank you to both Julian and Tony. I won't say last names in case you don't want them said, but you asked questions about this. And from what we see at Footsteps, there are a lot of people out there who can't take the risk, even of walking through our doors to have an initial conversation with our team, for fear of being found out. And I think that there are, you know, so many who don't, you know, fear the loss, especially once people are married with kids. It makes it really very difficult. The loss is much, potentially so much higher. And so, you know, people that I've met along the years, no one takes this decision lightly. It's not like, oh, one day, yeah, sure, I'll do this. You know, it's a really, it's a decision that people make, many by choice, but also like, you know, when they realize they can no longer live, like that there's a decision between life and death, and they're choosing life. And so the numbers are hard out there. In Israel, the stats are a little easier to find because there are actually population surveys out there, and they range between 10 and 20% of the Haredi population leaves in Israel. And in the States, we can't really get that type of data. We did a study a few years ago that said that there were, you know, 10,000 people who had left or could leave soon, and that was in 2015. So I would imagine, you know, another study is overdue. But, you know, more than that, what Ellie said, we find to be very true, that, you know, probably somewhere around 25 or 30% of folks have some level of discontent and try to find their way around some regulations. And sometimes people are able to do that within couples and within small families, and that works also for them, without risking the loss that is potential there. There's a question about how COVID has, or any of the aspects, how COVID has impacted, you know, folks who've left the community, and there's a question for Footsteps about how it's impacted our work. So I could take that also, but I want to ask Melissa and Ellie if you want to share a little bit of your perspectives on, you know, the current moment in time and the role that, you know, the OTD Fry community has played, or is playing, or its impact on them.
I'll let Ellie go first.
You turn on your mic to tell me to go first. Okay. Well, I mean, it's no secret that the Hasidic community was hit unusually hard by the COVID outbreak, and there are various theories about that. Whether it's because the circumstances around the initial spread was Purim, everybody was dancing together, eating together, drinking together with their families, and in large groups and visiting from home to home. But it spread like wildfire. And the fact is that there are just several factors present in the Hasidic community. There's a kind of a centuries-old distrust of authority, and of the non-Jewish government, and there is a lack of education, a pronounced lack of education, and a lot, a fundamental ignorance of like things like, chemistry and epidemiology and all these subjects that are not even touched upon in the kind of basic Hasidic education that we get in our school system. So they're just uniquely positioned for this kind of outbreak. Large families. I mean, social distancing laws presume that that it's possible to exist in groups smaller than 10. Most families are groups larger than 10. And that's immediate families. It's not factoring in extended families. Not to mention the entire community is based on community. It's based on praying together in groups and worshiping together in groups and eating together in groups. And to tell them not to socially distance is basically to tell them that they have to stop being religious, which again, coming from a non-Jewish government, they do not respond kindly to that. So it's very difficult for them. It's very difficult for those of us on the outside looking in with loved ones there. I mean, I personally would refresh Williamsburg News on Twitter obsessively to get the latest on who passed away. And I stopped counting at, was it probably 25 people that I knew personally. I don't want to do the statistics on that, but even if I know a few thousand people personally, that's still too high a number. And I know that to many of us, we've been kind of a lifeline of information to our families who don't consume social media, who don't have regular access to internet, who don't really know what information to believe or not. Many of them are, most Hasidic people today are, vote Republican. They're right-wing politically, so the information that they're getting is from Fox News or from President Trump. And so they were uniquely ill-equipped to deal with this. And they don't know, they have a sense that the information they're getting is biased, but they don't know just how biased it is and how twisted it is. So I've been in constant contact with my parents and with my family, and I'm very grateful that they took it seriously from the beginning. And my parents have been quarantining themselves since the first stay-at-home order was implemented. I think even sooner than that. And thankfully, they haven't gotten sick. Other members of my family have, but they're all doing better now. And I have friends who weren't so lucky, who had family members that didn't take it seriously, and they suffer the consequences. So it's really difficult.
Thanks, Ellie, for sharing. I might just jump in here and add, so at Footsteps, I mean, we've completely, since early March, pivoted everything to online support, as most organizations have. And the first thing we noticed was the amazing role that, our members of the OTG community and were playing as that educational lifeline for their families, and advocating, for them to listen to the public health guidelines. And, some successfully, like Ellie, and some less successfully. That's been a really important role and a hard role to play, but, that has helped, I hope, we like to think that that's helped the community. The number of folks who've left over the years has been helped to get some sort of secular knowledge in a moment that it might not otherwise be as much of it. We're seeing a lot of increased needs for mental health supports, both around folks who are, have yet to leave their homes. About 50% of active members who are seeking sort of more acute supports over the year, that's about 300 of the 1,000 people we serve annually, do live at home in the Haredi community, and that is isolation on top of isolation, and walls closing in on people when they can't get out to their friends that they are used to being able to have access to. So that could be hard. And then for folks who've left already, the economic realities are just really harsh, as they are for anyone who's on the margins and struggling. Right, the majority of folks we serve who've made it out are, people make it, but also people struggle financially for a lot of years, and they're finding amazingly creative ways to get by, and then a crisis hits, and the crisis is hitting our community in a way that it's hitting many marginalized communities across the country and across the world, which is that people are many people who we're hearing from are having a hard time putting food on their tables, our fear of being kicked out of their homes, even though there are, guidelines around not doing that, but they have landlords that are not following those guidelines. So that's, there's a lot of acute need right now, and there is a lot of triumph in this story, and then there are moments of acute need, and this is one of them, I think. So there's a lot of questions on here about, there's a lot of questions that we're not going to get to, so I apologize if I'm not getting to your question in particular. But someone asked also if there are more people reaching out to us now that it's remote. There are more people reaching out to us, not to leave, not to start a journey, but who've been out for a few years and who've had questions about whether they should reach out and should join, and they're finding that it's a time that they really want to connect with people who understand where they are, and connect to resources that they might need. So thank you, Miriam, for that question. There's a question about educational resources available to people who leave, and how people make it out given the educational barriers. And I'm curious if either one of you wants to speak to that piece, because it's a really important part of the journey out that we haven't really touched on in this conversation.
For me, I think I was really lucky because I was putting myself through school. So as I was leaving, I was in Touro College, and they have separate men and women's, one for religious folks. So I was already in school, and so that made it, I was able to bring that and bring my work out with me. But I think there was a lot of, Footsteps has definitely helped a lot of people that I know with getting their GEDs, or, like doing all the educational part, because a lot of people, some people don't even speak the language really well. So for some people, for me, English is not my first language, but as a woman, I got to learn English more, I think, than some men in the community, or the boys in the community. And so for me, I was lucky, I think. But Footsteps you can speak to more. They have all these programs that I know people have benefited from in so many ways. And then there's the grants to study other things that I was lucky enough to get some grants with that as well. But I'm gonna give it over to.
So by the time I left, first of all, growing up, I was lucky in the sense that my parents kind of became more Hasidish when they got married, but they had more American upbringings. Before that, they were both somewhat college educated. They both spoke English very well, and I was exposed to a high level of English at home. Even though I only spoke Yiddish until I was 10, I was exposed to it. And my parents had Reader's Digest condensed books, which were like the only books they let into the house. So I read a lot of the classics that way. I read a lot. I was very self-taught. I had no high school education to speak of whatsoever from a secular standpoint. I think I had a 9th grade tutor that was preparing me to take the Regents, but I don't remember why. I just remember that never actually materialized. I worked for it for a short while, didn't end up taking the Regents, didn't end up completing 9th grade, and that was that. Then I went to Touro College, had a branch in Borough Park called Mechon Parnassa, the Parnassa Institute, that was uniquely geared for Hasidic boys and girls who did not have a proper high school education. And they had remedial classes, they had remedial programs. I did all that. I tested out. I got into their full 4-year college program, and then ultimately ended up going to law school, which frankly was the only kind of graduate school I was prepared for. I had no background in math. I had no background in the hard sciences. The only thing yeshiva boys really train for is law school. And then the only reason being really because law school is the only graduate school that it has no prerequisites. There's no body of information or knowledge that you need in order to get into law school. All you need is some kind of exposure to analytical reasoning, which you do get in yeshiva. But I felt my entire life like I was playing catch up. Especially in law school and as a lawyer, I would constantly come across subjects, whether it's popular culture, popular knowledge, or things as basic as algebra, which I really had no exposure to. And I was lucky that I managed to have some professional success even without all that, but I can only imagine how difficult it is for somebody in a different position. And I know that Nick Moster at Yafed is doing tremendous work in that regard. But the fact that I grew up in New York and had no high school education to speak of, and my family's not particularly extremist, is shocking and should not exist.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks both of you. Thanks. I think that one of the things that some folks learn about is how much less of a secular education men have than women do. So many of the women that come to Footsteps might have already found their way into college, have negotiated that with their families, and it becomes, it's become increasingly accepted in some parts of some Hasidic communities. I just need to say there's a lot of different parts of this. And for men, the journey often starts with like getting the high school equivalency. For women, sometimes it's fighting for the high school to release their degree, even though they have it, right? And that's actually true for the founder of Footsteps. Her extended family helped her fight to get her high school transcripts released so that she could go to college. And that's Malki Schwartz, and a lot of what Footsteps was founded with the vision of is being that, sort of family out in the mainstream world that people might not otherwise have, to both help them access resources and be that, help to build that sense of community there. So, so I think, goodness, I'm trying to find which, there's a number of questions here about how folks could help, and I want to get to that in a minute. But before I do that, I want to make sure, because there are a lot of people on this call who also are folks who've left, and I'm curious if you have words of wisdom that you'd like to share to people who are maybe earlier on in their journeys than you both, and anything that you'd like to share to folks who are more on the inside of this. Because I think that that's a really important element here.
Yeah, that it takes time. It takes time, and that that it gets better. It gets better. It does. But kind of be kind to yourself and patient. I think that's like really big one. I wanted everything to be okay immediately. I didn't want to feel stupid to learn something new. I was like, I don't want to be like, I felt stupid. I didn't want to feel that. And also that what I found is I worked so hard to try to act like I knew what I was doing. And what I found is when I was vulnerable and honest and open that I don't know what's going on, people were willing to help me. And so that's something like, just say you need help and say you don't know something. I was very embarrassed of where I was from, and I just try to hide it. And another thing I learned, which I think is really, really cool, is that nobody knows everything, right? So it's okay to not know. There was I thought that I was so unique and that I was raised in this specific way. And then I met other people who didn't know other things. And so I felt like everybody has their own journey in life, and it's okay that we're on this journey, and it's just be kind. Yeah.
Yes, and I would add to that I've been in so many, social circles, higher circles, lower circles. I always feel like the odd one out. I always feel like I'm at a disadvantage. And then at some point I realized that everybody feels that way. Everybody finds networking difficult. Everybody finds making friends difficult. Everybody finds speaking to a person of the sex they're attracted to difficult. And that's okay. And knowing that you're not alone. I mean, for me, the hardest part of my adolescence was thinking constantly that I was alone. And it took many years for me to discover other people like me. Mostly, it really just happened to me in my 30s through footsteps that I started to meet like-minded people and realized that I wasn't alone. And that is, I think, the most encouraging and the most encouraging thing to know, for people to know out there, is that you're not alone, and other people are going through what you're going through, or have gone through it and have come out on the other side. And it does get better. And like Melissa said, be kind to yourself, and be patient with yourself, and learn to accept yourself. And ultimately you'll grow, and you'll grow to love yourself as a person.
Thank you so much. I think we could probably spend hours here talking. I'm going to address the last couple of questions because we do want to let people get to dinner. About, Lisa asked, Edgar asked, people asked about what folks who are not from the ultra-Orthodox community and don't share your background could do to help. Someone asks from a perspective of being a Jewish woman. Someone asks from a perspective of someone else who left a very religious community. And, from my perspective, the answer from that is to educate yourself, read memoirs, read articles that come out, talk to people, share these stories, share our members' stories, share the stories of courage and of self-determination, and encourage other people to tell these stories, and let the folks who are taking this courageous journey know that they're not alone, by educating your own circles about this issue. And of course, you could read more on the Footsteps website about some of the resources and the memoirs that are out there, and go to our YouTube channel to watch more about this, and sign up for our mailing list. And more than anything, education is vital, and also being a partner with us and with other organizations out there that are allies and that are supporting folks who are leaving ultra-Orthodoxy by helping to make a contribution is so important. So, you know, Footsteps is here. We've been here for 15 years. We're part of a global network of organizations that serve folks who are leaving ultra-Orthodoxy or who are advocating on behalf of them. A couple of others in the US and based in New York are Freedom, Yafed, that's Freedom's working on social and community and acculturation work primarily. Yafed is working on education reform. Unchained at Last is working to end child marriage in the United States. And so those are just a few beyond Footsteps. But there's a whole network of organizations out there that are supporting this issue, and you know, letting people know that in moments of need, they're not alone, and letting people know that in moments of joy, you're there and you're celebrating with them. So I think that that's really what you all could do to be allies out there for this community. I don't know if Melissa and Ellie, you have anything to add, but those are my thoughts on how people could help.
Yeah, everything that you said, I just want, this is the part of that loves my family, is also understanding the nuance of a community and understanding that when people leave, it's not that they want to villainize their community and they don't want to hear you villainize their community. So that's not helpful. But yeah, understanding the nuance of it, and that a lot of people are connected and it's not as black and white, and understanding that the people living there are also, it's not as black and white and not everybody's bad. And that's just like my 2 cents. It's like, my heart, my family is like my heart, you know, so it's so complicated. But everything that you've said, and yeah, I love that piece of just that we're not alone, and understanding that there's a lot of ways and different resources that can be helpful. And depending on, like, you know, some people mentoring, like that's really helpful to talk to somebody as a mentor in different fields or in different ways. Just somebody that I found very helpful is finding people that are older than me, that have lived life, that I can go talk to, because a lot of it, I can talk to my mom about a lot of my life, and I can talk to my sisters a lot about my life, or relationships and things that, you know, I don't share. So to have someone in the outside world be able to take that role is really helpful. So mentorship.
Thanks, Melissa. And Ellie, any last thoughts?
Not really. I mean, you've said it very well. I mean, I suppose there's a lot of room for people to help, whether it's just to educate themselves, educate those around them. I mean, understand that these communities that we come from are not monolithic. They're not all the same. Everybody's different. Each family is different. And like Melissa said, there's so much joy and love there as well.
Oh, we lost Ellie again. So I think the point there is educate yourselves and withhold judgment and withhold generalizations, and support organizations where you can and where you're able to. Ellie, you cut out. So I think we're gonna let people head to dinner, but I did wanna say, if you had questions and we weren't able to get to them because we couldn't get to all of your questions, you could feel free to follow up with an email, and we'll do our best to respond to you as fast as we can, but probably not immediately, since we're a little inundated with emails these days. So we're just so grateful for all of you, and thank you for your support and interest, and have a great night. And thanks so much, Ellie and Melissa. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Lani, and thank you, Melissa. Have a good night.
Good night.